Okay, so I now want to go through a few sample Math Excel questions for number 10 that you will see on your Chapter 10 assignment, just so you can get an idea of what type of questions that you'll be expected to answer. So I have, I believe, three questions that I want to go through with you based on the notes from the previous video. So a U.S. consumer magazine asked all adult subscribers whether they had used experimental medical treatments, and if so, whether they had benefited from them. For almost all of the treatments, approximately 22% of those responding reported cures or substantial improvement in their condition. What is the population? So remember, the population um, the population is who the group that we hope to learn about by conducting the study. So if we look at our our choices are all adults or those who do not use medical treatment. Well, it's a 50-50 chance. But if you look at B obviously doesn't make sense because the question here says all adult subscribers whether they had used experimental medical treatments. So B could not possibly be the answer. So what the answer is all adults in this country. They're hoping to learn about all adults who use these experimental medical treatments. Part B, what is the population parameter of interest? So in other words, what statistic are they measuring? What statistic are they learning about? Look at the sentence here. For almost all of the treatments, approximately 22% of those responding reported cures or substantial improvement in their condition. So proportion is just another fancy word for percentage. So our two choices are the proportion of the population who have used and not benefited, the proportion of the population who have used and benefited. Well, again, it says 22% of those responding reported cures or substantial improvement. That sounds like benefited to me. So the answer here is B. What is the sample for this study? Our choices are all adults who have used experimental treatments, all subscribers who responded to the survey. Again, I'm going to look at this last sentence here. Approximately 22% of those responding. So our sample is all subscribers who responded to the survey. Part D, what sampling method was used? Okay. It cannot be cluster sampling because we're not selecting whole groups. Voluntary response could be, but let's check the other two. Stratified sampling, that is definitely not the case. Systematic sampling, that would be like choosing every 10th person. So our answer here is B, voluntary response sample, because the subscribers could have chosen to either respond or not respond to the survey request. Is the sampling method used random? Okay, a voluntary response sample, that is not going to be random because people could choose to respond or people could not choose to respond. So you're not likely going to get an unbiased, truly random sample of people in order to make a worthwhile conclusion. So the sampling method, voluntary response, is not random. Number 2, to find the public views on pollution, researchers waited outside a car dealership. They had randomly selected from a list of such establishments. They stopped every 15th person who came out of the dealership and asked whether he or she thought pollution was a serious problem. All right. So again, we want to first look at what the population is. What do we hope to learn about? And our choices are people or all people except those who work at car dealerships. Well, B makes no sense because they stopped people coming out of a car dealership. So B would make no sense. So the answer has to be A. We're hoping to learn about just generally people's thoughts on pollution. The population parameter of interest. All right, I'm going to look at this last sentence here. They stopped every 15th person who came out of the dealership and asked whether he or she thought pollution was a serious problem. So the proportion of people who did not answer the survey or the proportion of people who think pollution is a serious problem. Obviously, here the answer is going to be B. The sample. All people except those who work at car dealerships. We already established that that doesn't make sense. Every 15th person leaving the car dealership. Well, that clearly says that here in that last sentence. So that is going to be the sample. What type of sampling method is it? Well, stopping every 15th person, that is a system, hence a systematic sample. Any potentially sources of bias you can detect, any problems you see in generalizing to the population of interest. So we could either say that there's no bias or under coverage bias is possible. Since those interviews just left a car dealership, their opinions about pollution may differ from the population in general. Okay, the key is that they're stopping people as they're leaving a car dealership. So their views on pollution may differ from people who don't have a car, from people who ride bikes, from people who walk. So that is what they mean by under coverage bias. So the answer here is A, because the key here is they're talking about pollution, and therefore the people that are leaving a car dealership are likely to drive a car, and their views may differ from people who don't drive. So that is it for the second sample question. Last sample question for chapter 10. Researchers waited outside a bar they had randomly selected from a list of such establishments. They stopped every 8th adult who came out of the bar and asked whether he or she thought drinking and driving was a serious problem. So this is kind of the same kind of thing that we did in the last sample question. So the population here, population is all adults who would visit a bar, or the population is the adults in the bar. Okay, this one's kind of tricky. Remember, the population is generally what we hope to learn about. So I would say that the answer here is A. It's not specific to people at that bar, but just people in general. Okay. What is the population parameter of interest? The number of adults who came out of the bar, the proportion of adults who think drinking and driving is a serious problem. Look at the last sentence. They asked whether he or she thought drinking and driving was a serious problem. So they're determining what percent or what proportion of the population think that drinking and driving is a serious problem. What is the sample for this study? Every 8th adult who came out of the bar. Okay. That, once again, is a systematic sample. It's the same thing as the last question. Instead of every 15th person, it's every 8th person. Is the sampling method used random? Okay, as long as they're consistent and stopping every 8th person, regardless of who that person is, I would consider that a random sample. Okay, and that is it for the sample questions for chapter 10.